So we're gonna get started. I'll introduce myself. My name is Alex. I'm a youth lead organizer at Luce. First, I want to give a thank you for joining us at the People's Forum. This is our third forum organized by young people, but it is our first forum organizing an Oregon State Race Forum. We want to give a special shout out to Professor Kuman and the sociology class of 364 for helping us host this also. We want to thank the College of Law students for all your support too. A special thanks to the IT team who helped us make sure this event ran smoothly. And also a special thank you to CCTV and Rayo Poder for live streaming and also broadcasting this candidate forum. Now we're going to be taking the time to present organizations that are also co-hosting this with us.
This is Black Joy. Black Joy Oregon celebrates, amplifies, and uplifts the global majority, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, and other historically marginalized community members by creating spaces where they can find solutions and build confidence in their leadership capabilities and create environments that make space for us to find and rediscover joy within ourselves and others. We do this by meeting the needs of our community that have strategically excluded by systems. We aim to provide education and resources to help these communities become independent from these systems that are set up to work against them. We strive to assist the communities in gaining the knowledge and tools to obtain food, sovereignty, and security, not only through the produce grown and distributed directly to community from our Black Joy farms at zero cost to community, but by way of in-home urban gardening systems for those who don't have the property or funding for an at-home garden.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Axel. I'm here today with Luis and students from Sociology Transnational Feminism. We would first like to thank Luce and Black Joy Oregon for organizing this event. We would also like to thank staff and workers at the Willamette Integrated Technology Services and other workers and facilities who made today's possible.
The students of Sociology 364 are happy to support Latinos Unidos Siempre in making this event possible. We want to thank the youth who came and the youth who are taking initiative to serve their communities.
Thank you. My name is Alondra. I'm a youth organizer at Latinos Unidos Siempre, and I'll be introducing Luz and a little bit of the work that we do. So Latinos Unidos Siempre is a youth-led social justice organization. We are people who come from historically marginalized communities. Together, we work for the educational, cultural, and political development of the youth. We as youth empower each other to decolonize leadership roles in the community and make leadership accessible to directly impacted youth. Leadership development supports our work to combat racism and all other forms of institutional and systemic oppression and discrimination through grassroots organizing. We have two major programs that support youth in our community: a leadership program that helps young people develop their cultural, social, and political skills, and a mentorship program that supports young people by giving them access to resources, education, support, and positive youth development. To start off, I want to do the land acknowledgement. So before we go on with our event, I would like for us to take some time to acknowledge the lands that we are standing on. We are standing on indigenous lands stolen and taken by force by European colonizers whose legacy of white supremacy continues to impact indigenous communities to this day. The bloodshed that has stained these lands will not be forgotten. The land we stand on is the land of the Kalapuya people. Together, let's honor the Kalapuya people and commit to standing in solidarity with our indigenous siblings of this nation. Together, let's remember who has walked thousands of years on these lands and who they truly belong to. Together, let's stand with our indigenous siblings to keep indigenous people's traditions, language, lives, and cultural lives alive and thriving. To the Kalapuya people, thank you for allowing us to be here today.
Thank you, Alondra. Now we'll be getting started. Today we'd like to take the time to thank both candidates for being here. You have taken the time of your day to educate the community about the importance of voting. Today we have Paul Evans from District 20, and we also have Virginia Stapleton from District 21. We will move on to questions put together by 15 youth leaders from Salem, Kaiser, and Woodburn. The first question we'll have, or before we get started, I know I had spoke a little bit to the candidates about how the process would work. Pretty much the way it would work is we have a statement, we have some questions for folks from the youth who are gonna ask them. We do have a timer on each question and how much time folks will have to answer. We have someone here named Angelique who will be giving them a heads up of whether they have 1 minute, 2 minutes if their time here has ended. And pretty much that's it. We'll get started with the very first question is tell us about yourself, why you are running for office, what makes you most qualified candidate for this position, and what would you like from the community to know that are present today? And I'll pass it to Virginia Stapleton first. And your time will start now.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
You can bring it forward.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Virginia Stapleton. As you heard, I'm running for House District 21, and I am a lifelong resident here in Salem, Oregon, born and raised, and born into a really large family. I tell this story so that you can better understand who I am and where I'm coming from. I have 11 brothers and sisters, and my parents really brought us up in a spirit of service and recognizing the needs around you. And so it was with that real heart desire to see the needs around me and to do what I can to help that I got into politics. I was really early on when I started in our community here in House District 21, started serving at my kids' Title I school, served on the school board's budget committee, and ended up running for city council, where I have spent the last 4 years working hard for our community and really trying to improve everything the best that I can. And then I got the bug and the urge to run for State House. Really excited to work with this guy in the coming years and really focus in on affordable housing and transportation options for folks. Also, mental and behavioral health care, really important to me and my family to make sure that we make investments there. And I am dedicated to making sure that we retain our rights for reproductive care, and also really, really passionate about local governments and our local school system. So those are some of the reasons why I'm running, and I can't wait to answer more of your questions so that we can get to know each other a little bit better. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Evans, your time starts now.
All right, my name is Paul Evans. I'm running for re-election to House District 20. This would be hopefully my 6th term serving the public. Who am I? I'm a person who was raised in the Mid-Willamette Valley, grew up in Monmouth. My mom and her mom, when they first came to Monmouth, actually first came to Independence in the 1940s, they lived in a converted chicken coop, picking in the fields because the single mom with not a lot of future, really didn't have a lot of options back then. So I've been raised to believe that you're all involved in the community to try to make sure that everybody has a fighting chance. I spent my entire adult life in public service. In the military, spent 20 years, about 4.5 years spent in combat zones. I've been a professor and currently do that. And I'm also been serving at the local level, state level, and in the legislature. I believe ultimately that every candidate that runs for office should be able to tell you what the difference between themselves and the other candidate. And in this case, it's very simple. I believe that leadership skills are important. They're things that are learned. They can't be read in a book. I think that experience matters, both as a leader as well as a follower. And I also think that ultimately you have to have a vision. And my vision for Oregon is very simple. I think every Oregonian, every person that's here, regardless of what planet or what country or wherever you may have come from, if you're here, you're part of our community. And that means that everybody should have an opportunity to fulfill their dreams. I think everybody should have a right to a safe environment, air, land, water, streets. I think that everybody has a right to protected speech, action, the right to live, to love, to learn, and ultimately that we have to be good stewards of the planet that we have because we only have got one. I think I've done that so far, and I ask for your continuation for the opportunity to serve.
Thank you. So we're gonna get on with the questions that the youth have put on for the community, for the candidates. I'll be reading the statement, and you guys can also follow along with me. So this year, school districts around Oregon got millions of dollars in budget cuts. Salem-Keizer School District is the second biggest district in Oregon, got over $70 million in budget cuts, resulting in the termination of over 425 school jobs. The result of this budget cut has been a general decrease in the overall quality of education. Students from Salem-Keizer and Woodburn have reported that they experience overcrowded classrooms, difficulty accessing mental health and academic counselors, and have little to no access to culturally responsive educators of color.
Hello, my name is Janeri, and I go to South. If elected, what will you do to ensure our schools are fairly funded? What are some specific policies or plans you have to address the funding gap?
And your time starts now. We can start off with Paul.
Okay. So just a couple of things I'd like to start off with in terms of the question. One of the reasons there were cuts this year is because the Salem-Keizer School District actually expanded services during the contagion, and then the state had to actually pull back some of those resources, and programs that were long-term programs versus short-term programs had to, in many ways, unfortunately, be cut. This is despite investments in recent years for something called the Student Success Act and other targeted programs that I've voted all along to try to help marginalized communities and folks who have had more struggles than others. The simple fact is this, and anybody who's listening back in TV land, we are continuing to move the deck chairs on the Titanic until we actually recognize that the fundamental problem is that Measure 5, Measure 4750 are artificial constraints, and they are preventing students like you from getting the opportunities and the education I have. So I'm hoping people will be listening to that. Now, what have I done? Literally, I've made almost everybody in the state of Oregon mad through a number of opportunities that I've put forward in terms of legislation, one of which this last session in 2024 was House Joint Resolution 201, which was designed to be the first bypass of Measure 5 4750. And the counties and the cities who right now say they need money were the ones that actually made sure that bill didn't get to the voters. So what am I going to do? I'm going to continue to fight because I believe at the end of the day, the quality education model, in addition that we update every 2 years, is where we should be shooting for. And we are not meeting our responsibilities, our duty as Oregonians by not getting you the services that you need. So I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing, and hopefully with your help, convince the folks back home to basically get rid of Measure 5 4750 so we can have adequate funding.
Thank you, Paul. Virginia?
Thank you so much. I really want to start this off with telling you all a little bit about my story. I am a non-traditional student myself. I disassociated from most of my elementary school. I do remember my 6th grade. I had an undiagnosed reading disability that went really unknown until just a few years ago. I was kept home for middle school to do some home ec for a couple of years to help our family out. And then I was dropped off at Northeast Salem High School and was expected to thrive. And of course, that did not happen. I ended up dropping out as a sophomore. And when you grow up poor, you idolize work, and that is what I did. I went and I got a million jobs, and I worked hard. And I didn't go back to get my GED until about 6 years ago. And I did that. I got my GED, and it was fabulous. And then I went and got my associate's degree from Chemeketa. I now have 2 kids in the public school system, one at North, which is crazy, and one at Parrish. And I have one who's excelled math and reading and all of the things, and I have one who's struggling with severe dyslexia and dyscalculia. And I recognize the challenges that parents face right now, and I want to be that parent that goes and not only fights for my own kid, but fights for every kid in the district to make sure that they have everything that they need in order to survive and thrive. And I agree with my colleague here, Measures 5 and 50 and 47, I've been saying this for years now at the city level, are the reasons why we are struggling so hard at the local level, and they have to be addressed. So I am really eager to get to the state level and tackle these issues so that families have what they need. Our schools are vital to our communities, and they have to be able to thrive in order for our families to thrive. So that is going to be a passion project for me, and I'm really excited. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janeri. The school to prison and deportation pipeline is an issue that disproportionately impacts poor, disabled, Black, Indigenous, and immigrant youth and youth of color in Oregon. The school to prison and deportation pipeline is a term that describes the systematic impacts of policing in the U.S. Schools that create excessive forms of punishment and for behavior and learning disabilities. The impacts of the school to prison and deportation pipeline often begins as early as kinder and follows youth into adulthood. Students are pushed out of their schools and into the juvenile justice system instead of receiving the support they need to succeed. These school policies are fueled by fake, ableist, and racist narratives that paint poor, Black, and brown disabled students as dangerous and aggressive. These narratives erase the humanity of students and see them as a potential criminals, rather than students who need access to resources. Some of the systematic issues caused by the school to prison and deportation pipeline include education funds being used to pay for behavioral or physical presence of police in schools, the surveillance, security guards, weapon detectors, and overall structure that funds punitive education over accessible learning. System impacted refers to people who have been directly affected by the legal system, either through incarceration, the incarceration of a loved one, or somehow negatively impacted by the criminal justice and legal justice system.
Hi, my name is Marlene. I'm a student at Woodburn High School, and my questions for you guys are, will you prioritize systems impacted students? How will you improve this to students through policy? And how will you work to address the impacts of the school to prison and deportation pipeline through actual state policy and funding?
And we'll start with Virginia. Your time starts now.
Thank you so much. This is such a really important question for our community to ask and to really wrestle with. As you heard in my previous answer, I am very attuned to especially folks who are in our education system that are struggling with disabilities. And so I can relate on a certain level to the struggles in this. I think a lot of kids feel threatened when they're in our schools, and I think they feel that they are not seen for who they really are, and I believe that that is something we have to address and fix. I want to create a community that cares, and I think that when you do that, when you can focus in on funding programs that support young families, I think that's where it starts. When we look at funding early child care education, looking at funding our K through 12 schools fully, and then creating models that reach these kids that are really struggling and making sure that they know that they are invested in. I know that that is a huge challenge, and we are looking at changing a culture, and that takes time, and it is very difficult to do through policy. But it takes courageous leadership to take on these challenges. And you are looking at two people, I believe, that are willing to take on those challenges and really push for reforms that are needed and to get those across the finish line.
Thank you. Paul, your time starts now.
So thank you very much for the question. I absolutely believe what Virginia said is on the right path. I want everybody in this room to remember the name Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist, common spelling, Norquist. Grover Norquist once in the 1980s said that his goal of government was to cut it by little pieces until it was small enough to drown in a bathtub. And I want to emphasize that because money isn't the only problem for government, but money is still a part of the problem. So let me explain. Once upon a time, Oregon school systems were seen as some of the best in the country. And piece by piece, we have been trying to continue to operate with basically a third of what used to go into the public governance column not being in there anymore. How that affects things is first you take away the programming that are for special needs folks. Then you take away the programming for English language folks. Then you take away the funding for smaller class sizes. Then you take away the funding for this, you take away the funding for that. So let me start with a kind of a three-point process, how I'm going to try to make things a little better. One, we need to get adequate funding for the schools so that the programs that are designed to help folks who have had more problems, more challenges, historic setbacks, that you get the services that you need. Second, we also need to unspiral something that the legislature did a few years ago, having to do with special needs and mainstreaming folks who take other parts of the budget because federal law requires that they move that money over for that. That needs to be unspooled a little bit because it was a statewide solution that really should have had special or school district flexibility added to it. And the third is, in terms of trying to get in the way of the prison or the school to prison pipeline, is rethinking how we actually approach students and finding more and more one-on-one mentorships. One-on-one, more and more one adult to one student relationships, because we know the number one factor in actually having a good outcome is if people actually are wrapped around the student, help them through the hard times and move them into a productive future. We have to get back engaged in each other's lives again, and that's going to take a culture change, like Virginia said. It's also going to take the right amount of money, and I look forward to being a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have been living under a housing crisis. Oregon is leading state in families without shelter. We are also leading in youth and minors without shelter. According to HUD, more than 1,400 young adults and children experience homelessness without a parent or guardian in Oregon. Last year, the majority of that group was nearly 70% were between the ages of 18 and 24.
Hello, my name is Aleida, and I'm a senior at Woodburn High School. My question is, what is your plan to address the housing crisis in your district? What specific funding would you advocate for, and how do you plan to achieve this?
Paul, we can start with you, and your time starts now.
Okay, so I'll be honest, I'm not going to solve the housing crisis. I'm going to try to improve it. And over the last 10 years, I've voted in favor of something like $2 billion put into the housing and homelessness problems. The challenges are this. In many ways, we're approaching the wrong end of the problem. For at least 20 years, we were encouraging builders to build the wrong things in the state of Oregon in terms of where they got their money for the project. They were building McMansions and they were building commercial space. Often commercial space that didn't actually have links to daily jobs, but rather storage and batteries and other things like that. We have to rethink not just how we're going to improve the housing stock, but that means putting housing in a longer-term plan of where housing is next to food, next to schools, next to the ability to actually work and live in the same area, which we've never really been good at. Our land use planning that we put into place in the 1970s did a great job of protecting farm and forest land, but it didn't do so well in terms of giving us tools inside the urban growth boundary to make things. So what am I going to do? One, try to increase the public-private partnerships that provide opportunities for people to not just rent and get stable housing, but get into places where they can basically rent to own. Two, find secondary income streams so that builders can actually build the housing that we need and still find enough profit to be able to make it work largely off of energy and solar powers or solar panels and other types of things like that. The third thing that I'm hoping to do is to work with the cities to recognize that in certain cases, prescriptive, very carefully crafted land use planning can actually be adjusted to ensure that we don't build in the wrong places and that we actually provide incentives through land price and other things to the right housing. So I want to say, number one, on this topic, Virginia is a leader in her community. She's been pushing a lot of things through the city of Salem. Housing is a state issue in terms of trying to provide resources for the cities, and I'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Virginia, your time starts now.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I agree with all of the things that you're talking about. And this is a crisis that has taken us 40 years to get into. And I'm sorry to say, but it's going to take us decades to get out of it. But again, it's going to take leaders who recognize that and who can really put their mind to work and continue in that direction and not relent on doing the good work of getting people housed. Now, I want to talk about the whole spectrum of the housing ecosystem, everything from a tent on the side of the street all the way up to those McMansions that we were talking about. We have historically been underbuilding that middle housing, and houses for first-time home builders or home buyers. And so it's really critical that we put into that so that we can help people achieve wealth, because wealth in this country is attached to home ownership. So it is really important that we help people move up that housing ecosystem. When I was on the city council, we approved over 4,000 units to be built in the last 3.5 years here in Salem, and we have done that through good planning, making sure that they are on or close to mass transit lines, close to services, close to jobs, close to schools, so that people can have choice in transportation, which is the second highest cost for folks every month. And so all of those things you have to take into consideration. We've also increased our low barrier shelter beds by 1,000 here in Salem. That is doing the good work of getting people housed. And I just want to touch on something very briefly in my time left, that even being housing insecure is traumatic. And you cannot talk about our housing crisis without talking about our mental and behavioral health crisis as well. Because being unhoused or being housing insecure, that takes a toll on a human. And if we are building a community that cares, we will not only build housing where it fits all of those things like jobs and schools, but we will also understand that we need to build out our mental health care system to help people who have suffered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. In Oregon, immigrants make up 13% of the labor force, including 60% of the state's full-time farmer labor force. Immigrants also contribute about $33 billion to Oregon's $256 billion economic, which is 13% of this total GDP. In 2020, immigrants paid $1.7 billion in state and local taxes and $3.6 billion in federal taxes. Despite the major economic contributions that immigrants make to the U.S. economy and public sector, many immigrants cannot access public benefits, especially housing. This year, the state of Oregon shut down the only publicly funded program that provides emergency housing assistance and accommodations for immigrants seeking asylum.
My question for both of you is that, what is your plan to address housing insecurity for families and individuals who do not qualify for federal housing assistance due to their immigration status?
Virginia, your time starts now.
Thank you. Such a really important question, and I want to start off by saying that I really appreciate Representative Evans' opening statement about how we view our community and who is deemed worthy of investment and care. And I think it's so important that this topic, especially now, Lord, over the past few months, this has been used as a tool to divide our communities, this idea of immigration. Immigration is key to our success as the United States, that's what I believe. I think it is key to our success as a community in recognizing our whole community and the value that every single person has, innate value in just being here. And I think that we need to do more in order to bring our community together around this topic and ensure that we are not demonizing a people group or using our positions of power. Some people are using their positions of power to divide us with this, and it's not okay. It's never been okay, and it never will be okay in my book. So I will work hard. I think that appointing a task force to address the issue and really listening to the folks who are suffering through this so that we know the challenges. One of the worst things I think a politician can do is go in without knowing the intricacies of the issue and try to make things better, because oftentimes we can make things worse. So I think it's really critical that we go into this listening to our community, reaching out to folks who are suffering, and listening to what they're experiencing, and then working hard to try to address those and relieve the pain and suffering in our community.
Thank you. Paul, your time is started.
So somewhere around 1870, after the first wave of the Irish immigrant population came to the United States, there were 9 million Irish people in the United States and 6 million in Ireland. Immigrants are the heart and soul of the American story, and anybody who tries to deny that is either lying to you or ignorant, and I don't know which one's worse. Immigrants are not only vital, but quite frankly, for anybody right now who's receiving a Social Security check, you should thank an undocumented worker, because somehow, some way, they're actually paying into the system for you. So let's back up and ask the right question for this answer. Honestly, I believe that there are certain aspects of immigration, especially folks who are here for a short time for harvest seasons, that the housing needs to be secure, safe, and available. But in terms of treating folks who are planning on being here for the long term, whether they have whatever immigration status they have, if they're here for the long term, I want to treat everybody the same. If you have need, we will find a place for you to live. My faith does not really draw a distinction between color or a lot of other aspects that we sometimes like to define ourselves by, but charity and love is supposed to be the most important piece. And that means that there's dignity for human beings, you get a place to live that's safe, you get an opportunity to work that's safe, and you get treated before the law, at least as far as humans can be, as fairly as possible. So we'll continue to do things I think we're doing. The project that was mentioned that got unfunded this year, I thought we were able to what's the right appropriate term on TV? Thought we were able to unscramble that. I'd like to talk to whoever it is afterwards, because I thought in the supplemental budget we actually did get that program going again. So I want to clarify. It's unconscionable that it got taken out. We'll try to figure out why. But the bottom line is we have a duty and a responsibility to make sure that people, regardless of what papers they have, are treated with dignity, period. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This year, we have seen efforts to get rid of protections that our immigrant community worked very hard to obtain.
If elected, how will you ensure immigrant communities are protected, and do you support the Oregon sanctuary law?
Paul, we can start with you, and your time starts now.
So I'm actually the public safety co-chair on Ways and Means, presuming I get to have that job and haven't made too many people too angry, which is always a question. I will continue to do what I think the legislature is supposed to do and provide oversight and remind people that the funding they get for the programs have to be based on following the law. And with respect to some people who like to claim constitutional status as a sheriff or whatever they want to call themselves, bottom of the line is that when it comes to a sanctuary law status, I not only support it, but I am a pretty fierce defender of the lines. Now, I want to be clear. If somebody happens to be a criminal, that's not an excuse. But I refuse to try to turn immigrants into criminals because you're an immigrant. Very, very different reality there. So I believe, and in fact I've had lots of conversations with every level you can, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, sheriffs, police, corrections folks, that the sanctuary law is not simply something that is a fantasy land. It is in fact a reality here in Oregon. We are not going to allow the state apparatus of providing services and public safety to be abused by those who want to turn immigration into a little football game. And I want to put a marker down on immigration as a federal issue. The dirty little secret is, at the federal level, the far left and the far right actually don't want a solution. This is not hard math. People who want to be here, people who want to be in America and make it better, that's a net win for us. But because of the economics of the factor, there's this weird little world that has its own reality back in DC that doesn't want to fix this problem. I'm hoping that with let's just say leadership in DC, actual leadership, we can resolve this issue and move on. Because as soon as we recognize we're stronger together than apart, we might just have a fighting chance against China and Russia in terms of regaining what we used to have.
Thank you. Virginia, your time starts now.
Thank you. Yeah, I will be fairly short on this answer. I think that what I've said so far really speaks to my heart on this issue. I will say that my opponent has recently worked hard to get a bill to the voters that would take away our sanctuary status. That is not okay with me, and I will do everything I can to work hard to protect this and to protect the people who really find refuge under that law. I think it's really important. My faith, my humanity, sees people as people. And I'm here to help protect people and to give them the best chance they have at fulfilling the best life that they want to live. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. In 2022, the Oregon legislature passed a House bill House Bill in 2015, also known as the Driver's License for All, or the Equal Access to Road Act. This allows all people in Oregon to apply for a driver's license or ID regardless of their immigration status. This law was very beneficial to all Oregonians because it ensures that individuals don't get racially profiled when driving. It also ensures that all people take a driver's test, which improves the safety on the roads. However, this policy is under attack. Some anti-immigrant groups have explicitly shared and stated that their goal is to repeal HB 2015 despite its benefits.
Do you support driver's licenses for all, and how will you fight to protect this law when under attack?
Virginia, your time starts now.
Thanks. Yes, I do support it. I believe that this is very common sense. When we are all sharing a space like the road, I think all of us need to have the same protections, the same tests that you need to pass to make sure that we are all understanding the rules, that we are all working together to create safe spaces in our transportation system. And I think that when you have that driver's license, when you have that insurance, you're being a good neighbor. We are all working together under the same rules. And our roads are very much so not safe spaces right now. And I think that this is another one of the ways in which people who tend to have racist ideas are trying to other people and trying to put other folks in a different space than they are in, and I think that it's not okay. And I think it's common sense to have this law, and I would support continuing it and defend it against folks who want to tear it down.
Thank you, Paul. Your time has started.
So, first of all, I believe I voted for this bill when it came through, so yes. Although I'm not really fond of the driver's license for all approach because I would prefer you actually have to pass a driver's license test. But everybody that wants to take the test, yes, I think that's absolutely right. Now, because I'm an honest guy, I have to tell you that there is one thing that I have a small problem with, and it has nothing to do with where people are at or anything else. It's that right now there are some in the agricultural community that are abusing a little asterisk that we put in there that said that you don't need a CDL to take a farm truck from a farm to another farm. It was passed with the idea that if you have a farm in one end of the county, you could take it to the other end without having to get a CDL. There are some folks right now abusing it, and somehow the trip from, let's just hypothetically say, Amity to Malheur County doesn't really seem like it's actually farm to farm. It seems like they're kind of getting around the CDL process. But as far as it goes, in terms of whether or not every person in Oregon who's driving on the roads should be having access to getting a legitimate driver's license, the answer is absolutely yes. And in fact, I've been fighting with the feds on trying to figure out a way to make the CDL process even more available and more accessible for folks. So I'm already on board on this, and I'll continue to fight for it.
Thank you, Paul and Virginia. In 2022, the legislature passed HB 4002, which created basic overtime protections for agriculture workers in Oregon, similar to overtime protections that have covered most workers in the U.S. since 1930s. As of January 1st, 2023, employers have been required to pay overtime to agriculture workers after they work 55 hours in one work week. This is a basic human and labor right that was denied to farm workers before.
If elected, how will you ensure that farm workers and immigrant workers in general are protected in the workplace, treated with dignity, and paid a fair wage?
And Paul, your time starts now.
So part of, I think, being a leader is sometimes telling people hard truths. And in this particular case, the hard truth is there was a better bill we could have got, but we didn't actually have the courage to do it. In talking with a number of folks who are still in the fields and those who spent a career in the fields, the bill we got does certainly provide for more overtime, or provide for overtime pay, but in many cases actually has ended up resulting in a smaller paycheck. There was flexibility that we were looking at in terms of housing and other kinds of things that could be used as offsets to make sure that the net value to the worker would be better. And unfortunately, the political environment didn't allow that. I give you that premise to say the following. My mom's first job out of college was working for a group called the Valley Migrant League during the Johnson years. And her job was to try to find ways to get people into jobs with dignity and support. I believe that that is a noble quest. I committed to trying to do the best I can to make sure that every family, every worker has access to not just good pay, safe conditions, a safe place to live. But I do believe sometimes we have to look at the whole picture and not just on one aspect, because sometimes when you look at wages, especially with the inflationary impacts, that isn't getting you really as a family more of a value. So what I'm committed to doing is continuing to listen to the groups that are involved, to listen to the folks that are in the field, to listen to other stakeholders, to try to find a sustainable way to make sure that we get better pay, more sustainable pay, and more dignity for those involved in that process. So that's my commitment.
Thank you, Paul. Virginia, your time starts now.
Thank you. I agree with everything that Representative Evans just said. This is an issue, of course, that needs to be addressed. I also want to bring up the fact that we have underfunded our BOLI group, and they're the folks that go out and ensure that workers are being treated fairly, that there is not wage theft. And I think right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, I think we have 4 employees at BOLI for the whole state? For wage investigations, we have 4 employees for the whole state. And I don't know about you all, that doesn't sound like enough. I believe that they have to let go of a lot of complaints every year just to kind of just let it go. They're not even going to investigate. So to me, making sure that we are funding those folks so that the laws that we are passing are being upheld, right? Why are we passing laws that are not being upheld? So making sure that we can enforce that, making sure that we hold companies accountable for the mistreatment of their employees is going to be critical as we move forward. And again, I agree with everything that Representative Evans said as well, and really excited to work on this issue because this is about dignity, this is about folks thriving in their communities, and all of us working together as a town and a state to make sure that we move forward on this issue. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. In 1994, Measure 11 was passed as a result of racial stereotypes and national hysteria towards the false narrative of increasing crime. Measure 11 established a mandatory minimum sentence for certain crimes, which meant that individuals must serve a minimum sentence in prison before being eligible for parole. It did not matter what life circumstances led to them to commit the crime. It allowed the state to give minors adult sentences. In combination with racist policing tactics in Black and brown communities, Measure 11 led to the mass incarceration and deportation of Black, brown, and poor people and immigrant communities in Oregon. Currently, we're the second to the state of Florida in the incarceration of minors who have been convicted with adult sentences. In Salem, we are surrounded by 5 prisons, but we only have 1 hospital.
Hi, my name is Yesenia. I go to Stevens.
Hi, my name is Leah. I'm an associate.
If elected, will you support the repeal of Measure 11? If yes, how will you make it happen?
But if no, what is your plan to address mass incarceration in Oregon?
Virginia, we'll start with you, and your time starts now.
Thank you. I believe these were passed in the 90s, and it was put forward by my opponent, Kevin Mannix. And I remember being against this back in the 90s. And I think that the damage that this has done to our communities is vast. And any time that there is policy that has been this detrimental to communities, it is worth us taking another look and seeing what can be done to fix it. I don't think that we have had the courageous leadership in place to date in order to really grapple with this, but I am committed to that. It has been really interesting to run for office against Kevin Mannix. So many folks have come forward to me and requested phone calls or video calls with me to tell me their story about how Measure 11 has impacted their life, their families' lives. And it has been devastating. It's been devastating to hear those stories and to know the damage that has been done. But it's also been devastating because looking forward, this is a huge lift for our community. And it has to be our community. I think it needs to go to the voters, and I think that I will do everything I can to have this be repealed. I think that folks deserve their day in court, and they deserve to stand in front of a judge and a jury and have the whole story taken into consideration and have that process worked out through a community, not through somebody who came up with an idea in the 90s and put minimums on things that they don't even take in the whole story of the whole person. And so I really do think that this is an area that we went too far on, and I will work hard to do everything I can to make sure that we can move on as a community and begin the healing process, for sure.
Thank you. Paul Evans, your time starts now.
So in this particular case, I have very mixed feelings, so I'll walk you through it. Yes, I actually believe Measure 11 needs to be repealed. However, my reason for repeal is a little different than my colleague and friend. I believe that we actually have judges to wait for it judge, instead of what has effectively become a charging system that the district attorneys determine what charges are going to be brought that then bring in what potential sentences are in play. It's time to go back to actually having judges that take the whole story and hold people accountable. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not the mushy kind of guy. I actually believe that if somebody commits a violent crime, their life story should be considered, but they still also have a victim, and the victim should have equal say in terms of the outcome because they're the folks that are also affected. That said, you cannot have a just system when one side has more tools in their toolkit than the other. And right now, the district attorney, the prosecution side, has far too many tools in the current environment, and judges are limited. And I actually want to put it back to where our judges judge. The parole board has a role to play. Right now, has a very small role to play because of Measure 11. And I think that the system of justice is supposed to be more flexible that way and, quite frankly, more reflective of the community. I don't know how to get there because there's not enough courage in the building right now to get money for schools, much less perhaps potentially be linked in a political hit ad of voting in a way that somehow let a murderer out too early. But somehow we have to get to a place where judges get to judge again, and I'm committed to trying to do that.
Thank you, Leo and Yesenia.
At this time, we'll have a 10-minute break, but thank you, Paul and Virginia, for answering the questions from the youth. We truly appreciate it. So we'll come back around 2:10, 2:11, around that time. So feel free to use the restroom, grab some snacks if they're still available. Yeah, and then after we come back, we'll have time for the public to ask questions for the candidates. But yeah, feel free to take that 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Are we ready to start, y'all? Yes, can we please get attention? Okay.
I'm gonna give them a second because they're doing sign language real quick. Okay. We just need 1 second. Just 1 second.
Hello, my name is Hannah Shootingberry, and I'm from the Indigenous Now and the Land Back. My question is, in 2022, the state of Oregon proclaimed Indigenous Peoples Day as a day. but yet not have yet come as you, as being on school board and as a city councilor, as you come. I've come to you a few times regarding this situation. Why has this not yet been fully recognized at the federal and state level?
So if I understand the question, why hasn't the day that we proclaimed Indigenous Peoples' Day become a federal and state holiday? Right. So feds, we can't, I mean, as God's my witness, if I could move the federal government to do something, I would, on anything. State. Yeah, state. So, yeah. Well, I'm pretty certain I won't get to represent us at a federal level, but I try to push those that are to listen. And one of the unique things about Oregon in terms of the holidays, we have actually several holidays that we have passed into existence. And in many ways, how we negotiate contracts is actually about what days we celebrate. So for example, May 8th every year is actually Military Family Appreciation Day, has been since 2009. Not once has it ever been recognized because it wasn't argued at the bargaining table. I happen to believe that we are moving close to being able to do that because we don't recognize Columbus Day as a state holiday anymore. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that. But so far, the bureaucracy has been the largest obstacle, just in truth in advertising.
And as you know, we are the stewards of this land.
I-
And we should be recognized, be the first to be recognized. And you gotta remember, the borders crossed us. We did not cross the borders.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why this is so crucial in our community, because we have not just the local natives here, we got other federally recognized tribes in this state.
Well-
So remember that. Don't forget us as well.
Ma'am, in fact, I have gotten in trouble with my friends arguing that if you actually look at statistical numbers, there are more indigenous folks in Oregon than there are a couple of other categories of race and ethnicity, and that some have their own months, and we don't have one for Native Americans. So I'm with you. I agree. I just haven't quite won that fight yet.
I would love to say, one, I'm with you as well, but I also want to use this as an opportunity to talk to the public about how important it is to get involved with your school boards, with your local city councils, with your union as well, if you are working in a union job, because it is where those grassroots things start, is where we can then build and get to the state level, and states can then build to the federal level. And that's how we move things, is by starting in these spaces like the school board, like city council. So it's so important. I want folks to hear this, that if you are able to get involved at all, even if it's a board and commission at your city, we need you. We need people who are passionate about these issues to start getting involved and working in these ways so that we can continue to push this forward and get movement in a lot of different areas. But this one, of course, I'm fully supportive of that, the state level, and really excited to start causing good trouble on this one as well. Yeah?
We did go to our school board. We did go to our union, and that's when they said, oh, we gotta go to our state representative, and that's where we're at this point in time. So thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for asking the first question. So we're gonna get into, now it's gonna be open for the public to ask the candidates questions. For the candidates, whoever feels more passionate to answer first, feel free to do so. And now we're gonna be opening up the floor to the community, anybody in this room who feels passionate enough to come up to the same podium that was set where the other questions were being asked, to ask a question freely. And we probably prefer here because I believe there's a camera there for live CCTV. So if we could stand here and making sure that's a designated spot. Thank you.
Hello, this is for Virginia Stapleton. My name is Jesus Escobar. As someone that cares about our cultural development in our community, I'm interested on your views on public art. would you support initiatives to increase the number of murals and public art installations in Salem? And how do you think this could benefit our city?
Thank you. I love this question. Thank you so much for asking. During the 4 years that I've been on City Council, we have been working slowly but steadily at removing the barriers that our community has right now because of city charter rules around public art. For me, I see art as freedom of speech and a really great way for our community to get involved with their neighbors, with other folks around them to build a community that cares and that is responsive to what's happening in the world. And so during my time on council, I moved to allow intersection art. Some of you may have some in your neighborhoods, but this was a way coming out of the pandemic that we saw that communities could come together and create art that represented their area and their culture. And it has been amazing to see those sprout up all over the city. And we are working on really allowing more public art everywhere. This is a way that we can communicate with each other. It's a way that we can connect with each other. And I believe that accessible art is really a powerful tool in expressing our heritage and expressing our viewpoints. I really would love to work with folks on functional art. So ways that we could, I'm really big into bike lanes and protected bike lanes, and I would love to see our folks from especially our indigenous cultures to work together to create functional art that not only works to protect people who are biking, but also really does placemaking and allows people to see the cultural heritage that we have. I think it would be a wonderful thing. So that's what I'm working on at the city and have been for the last 3.5 years. I hope that answers your question. This is something that I want to also take on to the state. For me personally, I don't know if you've noticed, but when you walk around the state capitol and the state grounds, there's not a lot of female representation or non-binary representation in the art that's on state grounds. I would like to change that. So yes, very passionate about this topic. Thanks for asking it.
Thank you.
Okay, it's all good. Hello, my name is Ryan Gale. I'm a community advocate. I work at Western Oregon University as the Disability Services Coordinator, and I'm also a disability access professor. And my question to you is particularly for Virginia, and then also Representative Evans, if you have anything to add, I welcome you to answer. We have spoken about the housing crisis today, our educational system, immigration, and I'm curious if you have anything to say about your opponents in this race and what they may have proposed in their campaigns that would negatively impact those areas, or why you don't encourage voters in Salem, Kaiser to vote for those individuals.
Thank you for the question. I want to be careful in how I answer. I think that an election, anybody who's running for political office should have a passion for what they're doing and good policy ideas and a connection to their community, and that's what gets them elected, not necessarily voting against somebody else, right, or tearing somebody else down. But there are very distinct differences between my opponent and myself. And I think that some of his ideas are going to be really, really harmful for our community, and I want to focus in on one of them in particular. He would like to get rid of the estate tax. And when I think about House District 21 and I think about the folks who live there and the struggles that they have, It's about the day-to-day. It's about housing. It's about access to food. It's about schools and their kids and their jobs. When we take away the estate tax, we are really benefiting the wealthiest of us here in Oregon. And we have to balance the budget. And so anything that comes away from that revenue source then impacts our schools and our ability to provide good transportation options and help people with their housing. And so when Kevin Mannix wants to take away taxes on the wealthiest Oregonians, what he's not saying is that it's negatively going to impact every single one of you and me, because we rely on a community that cares, that invests in their education, that invests in helping those who are in hard times. So that is probably the biggest area that I would like to really draw a distinct difference between he and I. I am funded by grassroots efforts. He is funded by mega corporations and the wealthiest Oregonians. That's a huge difference between us. And so I want to pull that one out. That's the one that I would focus on the most. Of course, there's lots of other areas. You can go on my website and see all the different ways that we're different, but that's what I would like to bring today.
First of all, thank you for the question. Thank you for what you do every day. One of the things I hope to do in the next session, if reelected, is to ensure that Western gets a PhD program in ASL and interpretive services. I say that because my opponent has a lot of good ideas, I think. I think they come from the right place. But I think there's a role for both leadership and experience. And you get experience by doing, and you learn leadership through failure. And I think my opponent, who has, again, a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of heart, would perhaps benefit from finding a particular space and taking root and actually learning government one job at a time. I say that because it's easy to promise things. And I have a record going back to when I was 18 years old as a city councilor. And the good, the bad, the ugly. I certainly can share with you the mistakes that I've made and the errors and the lessons I've learned. But I think the key difference between myself and my opponent is I offer myself warts and all as a leader who will do everything I can to protect this district and move Oregon forward. And I have the knowledge of how to do that. And I think that's the biggest difference.
I asked to add a little bit, so here goes. What I think is really great about folks like Representative Evans and myself is that we have both served at the local level. This is really critical when it comes to understanding measures 5 and 50 and 47, because we understand the funding issues at a really granular level. And that experience is critical when we are at the state level and making decisions that are impacting our schools, that are impacting our cities. And so something that, that I always love talking to Representative Evans about, and I think that we really connect well over, is that local level leadership. And it's critical when you start looking at state policymaking.
Thank you so much.
You guys can feel free to go up to the
I just
podium.
one at a time, just so
Yeah.
like the camera and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So just take note. I think
But I
two
think
folks over
Maria,
here.
and then you, and then the other person.
My question is, let me open this up. If elected, what will you do to ensure that your actions you take as lawmakers are meaningful and not just performative?
Well, let me tell you. This campaign, at 3 different forums, I've been accused of castrating Oregon's youth. I've been accused of genocide and of mutilation. I say that because the cool kids in school don't have to have those kinds of conversations. I spend my entire life as a public servant recognizing that my duty is to do what I think is right in the circumstances I find myself in. That means voting for bills that I don't necessarily agree with 100%, but if they do more good than harm and they move us forward, I will fight for them and I will defend them, and I stand up for every vote I've ever taken. The difference between those who do it for performance art versus actually governing, the performance art generally doesn't actually offer a solution and generally doesn't ever have any ask involved because people don't like to actually have to sacrifice. We say it, but we don't really like to. And if you look at the 200 or so bills that I'm introducing this next session, you'll see that almost every one's asking for sacrifice because ultimately I'm going to do everything I can to put Oregon on the right course before I depart the scene, or hopefully at least until the voters retire me. I think if you're in politics for the performance art aspect or the power or the glory or the prize, you're not only in it for the wrong reason, but you're dangerous. So again, warts and all, I offer my record. I don't think I'm ever going to be seen at the Cool Kids Club or somebody who is seen as the preferred candidate of a next generation of whatevers. But I also am the guy who, when people need to get things accomplished, am often in the room to figure out how we can get it done.
I think America has a problem idolizing their political leaders and expecting one person to save them. That is impossible. When people try to demonize somebody and say they're going to go to the state house or whatever it is and wreak havoc, I know that I am just one vote. And it's going to take collaboration in order to move things forward. And I firmly believe in progress over walking out or walking away from your job, taking the hard votes and knowing that you're going to have to defend yourself and your vote. I also believe in working hard for what you believe in and sometimes having that space where you bump up against your values and then being able to also stand up to that and hold to your values as well. The long and short of this is that Paul is not going to save us. I am not going to save us. There is no one person who is going to save us. It is going to take a community that decides together to move us forward. And yeah, I think that I am committed to being authentic. I'm committed to being vulnerable with people. I think people are really sick and tired of kind of that strong person, that loud, that brash person. I'm going to be honest with you and vulnerable every time. And because I think people are craving a real person when they look at their politician, somebody who has lived experiences that they can connect to and that kind of makes them understandable and relatable. And that's who I want to be, and that's who I want to take to the State House and represent you all. Thanks.
You guys have mentioned measures 5, 47, and 50 a couple of times. Can you give us some background on those, please, and how they affect our community?
Sure. Ooh, measures 5 and 50. How much time do we have?
We have until...
They answered me. It's funny. All right, so measures 5 and 50. I'm not a pro on 47. Do you want to handle 47 and then correct me where I'm wrong on 5 and 50?
I won't correct you, but I'll just
You
add.
help me out? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, well, this is going to tag team this one. So what measures 5 and 50 did is that they came at a time when local government kind of had free reign on what they were charging their tax base. So every year they would look at their budget and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z, so we need this much money, so we are going to change the property tax to this much to afford all of that. And that really was out of balance with the community, and it needed some regulation. So measures 5 and 50 came along, and what they did is they took those tax rates and they cut them in half, and then they froze them there. So for instance, City of Kaiser is at $2.52, I believe, as their tax base, And Salem is at $5.50. Eugene is at $8 and some odd cents, right? So it's this really hodgepodge across the whole state on what your tax base is. Now, it also said that your revenue can only grow at 3% per year. It locked that in. So what's great about that is that cities and school districts can count on 3%. It's really great to be able to know what's happening. The really, really horrible part is that, for instance, the city of Salem is looking at an increase in their costs at 7 to 10%. So you're automatically upside down. This brings into compression and all of those other things. I'm going to stop talking and see what you have to add. Can I add something? Sure.
Can I have just folks who are right there kind of move away or have a seat if you haven't asked a question, just so the camera has a clear view of the candidates while being live. Thank you. And then, thank you guys.
So this is a 2-minute answer? 3-minute answer?
I thought we had until 3. Sorry.
There's
All right.
timer.
All right, so,
How did I set you up? Did I set you up okay?
you did great.
Okay.
In the 1990s, so in the 1980s in Oregon, we had a very, very hard economic time because of not only the recession that brought in Reagan with stagflation, but we also had, we were tied to natural resources. In the mid-'80s, late '80s, some changes to timber production that was blamed on the spotted owl, which is much more complex than that, but nonetheless, created an environment where Oregon was trying to find its footing. In the 1990s, people discovered Oregon. They wanted to move away from California and other places, so we had a very rapid increase in terms of valuation around the state of Oregon. At the very same time that California was looking at their Prop 13 to control their property taxes, Oregon, which again does not have a sales tax, remember this, there were a couple of folks that I will not name that said, hey, you know what, you don't need to pay for everything that you're paying for. What's going on is local control really isn't that important, and we're paying for things we really don't need, and oh, by the way, the system that we have right now isn't fair. I want to put a marker down. The system we used to have was actually one of the most fair systems ever devised. What they used to do before Measure 5 was the assessor would go out and look at the entire value of the county and then assess your particular percentage of that total valuation. Instead, we decided to go with the California style of go it alone, you're on your own at that time, which was the politics in the Pete Wilson era. And in Oregon, what they did is they said, instead of as a county or as a region or as a district, your home itself should be the focus. Okay. And they also set a $10 per thousand limit, and they put a 6% growth that you couldn't exceed. That was reasonably manageable, although ironically, all of Oregon but Portland area voted against Measure 5, needs to be reminded. So then in 1996, another guy who we will not name, who was convicted of multiple felonies, by the way, but anyway, he got Measure 47 passed. And what 47 is, it said it limited to 3%, but it also did something very interesting. It said, oh, by the way, if your house was built in 1995, your market value never changes. What does that mean in 2024? It means if you buy a house that's right next to another house, one was built in 95, one was built after 95, the 95 house has a built-in subsidy and is maybe paying a third the price that you're paying for the very same services, the very same community, the very same everything. It was designed to constrain, and over time with that 3%, it was very purposeful. Remember Grover Norquist? It was very purposeful to cut local government and make the state stop doing what the state does to backfill public services at the local level. It was designed to kill the state of Oregon, and it is slowly, over 30 years, doing that. And anybody who wants to argue that, I'll meet them in any parking lot anytime. I am very angry that we have not solved that problem at the time we saw it, and then over years, we basically have tried to find workarounds. So that's why we come up with any number of taxes that confuse the voters even more. I happen to believe most Oregonians, if you say, what do you want for a level of service? How can we get there? Oh, by the way, we need to do this and this, would probably support it. But the reason Measure 5 and 4750 are such a challenge is because everybody, well, not everybody, Most people who are elected are afraid to even talk about it because there's this weird and I believe unsubstantiated fear that if we get rid of Measure 5, oh my goodness, what would happen? Well, if we got rid of Measure 5 legally, we'd go back to the system that was actually more fair. And wait for it, all the folks who you will hear on TV and in the campaigns and everything else, we want local control, they'd actually have it. But the secret is some don't want local control because then they'd be responsible for actually raising taxes that are necessary for the services they want. So it is a complex reality. At some point we have to fix it or we will continue to watch Oregon decline, period, end sentence.
Yeah, I think that we need to really understand that the cuts that we saw in the Salem-Keizer School District, 5 and 50 have a huge portion of that, and we have been cutting for years. You know, when I talk about, people want to link me to defund the police, listen to this. We have been defunding our entire government for 30 years, and this is what we get. The city of Salem is looking at, I think a $26 million shortfall this next June. So it's massive, and it is now starting to feel it in a way that we haven't felt it before because leaders have been able to kind of dice and splice in those million little cuts that we have in order to make it work and kind of hop along or limp along. We've been putting in things like operations fees or different things like that to help us through. That's not working anymore at all. We're going to start seeing things like libraries close, your parks start to close, because those are not, those are quality of life programs that the city runs, not necessarily emergency response. So it's really critical that our community leans into this conversation because it's going to take all of us.
If I could add something. The other thing that's real, and I want to be very clear to everybody out there going, oh my goodness, they're saying we need to raise property taxes. About 20 years ago, plus or minus, the United States effectively, not in law, but in reality, decoupled productivity from wages. Basically, with the growth of tech, it was possible for larger and larger earnings for corporations to be made without passing that proportional benefit on to the workers. And what that has meant is that for working families, it is hard to pay property taxes. They are going up. The net pressure of gas prices and the price of bread and the price of milk and the price of your property taxes going up is a challenge. But the question not being asked is, where is that value going? Since the contagion, and again, I want to be very clear, I'm a Democrat who believes business is good, and I believe every American should have the opportunity to someday become a millionaire. What I don't believe is that millionaires should be able to pass their money on to a generation of non-workers who simply feed off the system. So, when it comes to property taxes, it is a false dilemma in that we have to recognize that we have to make sure that wage growth and the rest of the economy is moving so that we can have the property tax structure that we need. That will mean, in the short term, a little bit of discomfort, but we also have to recognize it's time to go after the wealth that was amalgamated as a result of the contagion among the top 1% of folks across the country. They accelerated their gross wealth by factors of 10 plus when the rest of us were barely able to keep up. That's an important component. And I'm not, again, saying that we need to punish the rich, but we need to reform the structure so that everybody has an opportunity for those benefits and those life-changing currents instead of just a very few. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Alonso Oliveros of the American Friends Service Committee. So you mentioned previously for both of you, your support for Oregon's sanctuary law, a law that's been in place here since 1987, and which was recently strengthened to include the Oregon Sanctuary Promise Hotline, a hotline that the community can call to report any violations by bad individual police officers who are cooperating with ICE and, for ICE holds and detainers. And so currently there is this a hotline that exists, but it's got no teeth. It's got no teeth in the sense that even if we try to request information from the Department of Justice, they're not able to, they say that they don't release that information. So I guess my question to you is, in this next legislative session, what actions would you take to strengthen the hotline so that a community will be able to access individual violations, to be able to put some economic consequences to local sheriff's departments that are cooperating with ICE?
So a couple of things on that I'd like to start. Number one, I take great pride in the fact that the sanctuary law started because of a conversation in Independence, Oregon. And in great irony, it was actually folks who would now identify themselves as conservative that were for it, because their argument at the time was, well, we're not going to do the Fed's job, let them do it themselves, which was the whole idea, basically making sure that the local police weren't sharing things with the feds, because there was a little bit of, shall we say, they didn't really work and play well together in those days. So when it comes to the hotline, I can't promise that I can make the hotline more transparent, because I don't know the specifics of the legalities. But I can do two things, and I'm willing to work with you and whoever is willing to work with me on this. The first is, I think it's time that every city in the state of Oregon, and LOC is not going to like this, but every city actually have a law enforcement oversight board, and that is where the local law enforcement reviews policy. And in this case, I think that that would be one of those policies. What is the number of and circumstances when information is given to the federal government? The second thing is certainly willing to work with anybody on getting DOJ to release the information. The hotline itself, because of some rules and opinions that are in place of protection of names and sources for law enforcement, may be involved in that. But there is a way, perhaps, to get transparency, maybe not real time on the hotline, but at least trends or other data that's useful for seeing what direction we need to move in. And I'm willing to work with that. I think the next Attorney General is going to be much more willing to do that as well.
Yeah, I'll leave that where it is because of time and the questions that we have, but I just wanted to say LOC stands for League of Oregon Cities, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, but I would love to work with anybody on the issues that are important to them and bring it forward, and we'll work together to solve the problems.
Paul, I've spent about a decade wishing I was in your district so I could ask for help.
Good to see you again.
Virginia, honestly, I so admire the guts that you have demonstrated in the sleepless nights that I know you have. I have a question. I heard, I read on Facebook your reference to restorative justice. And I'm wondering what you might think is the reason that Salem's crime has been dropping since about 2018 by my calculations, and big time dropping in the last 3 years, and if those are related, and if so, thank you, and how?
It's always good to see you, Sarah, and I will do my best to answer this question. Earlier when we were talking about Measure 11, I really wished I had more time, because restorative justice is something that I'm really passionate about. Personally, in my own life, I have never experienced justice. Sometimes I wonder if it's actually a real thing or something that a social construct that we have developed in order to make ourselves feel better about the pain in which we all suffer in life. I think restorative justice is a way that we can repair the damage done in our communities and be able to build relationships with one another. Right now, we really are separate. The folks who perpetrate crime and those who are the victims are really held separate from each other. And I do believe that the only way that we have true healing is when we can bring those two together and find a path forward. I'm going to leave it at that because I know time is short and I want to give my colleague a chance to answer, but that is what I am committed to in this life, is moving to that general direction of how we interact together as a community. I don't think I answered the question, but that's the best I got right now, Sarah.
So with respect, I see two tracks to what you were asking, and thank you again for your kind words at the beginning. Restorative justice to me is something that we need to move towards, but I don't actually think it's possible right now because society, especially communities, are frayed by ideology and by, in many ways, the division between identity. And until we actually come together with an identity of a community first, relearn those lessons, I don't know that restorative justice in the way that it can really be powerful is there. If people won't listen to each other about anything, how do you actually have that happen? But I think it's a worthy goal, and I'm committed to trying to work on civics. In fact, after a couple of nights ago of an event, I listed 10 items I'm going to be putting forward as a bill for an agenda for civics, and hopefully we can move that way. The crime reporting thing, though, is a little interesting in that because of changes in policing in the city of Salem, I don't know that you're actually comparing apples to oranges anymore. I don't know that crime has gone down. I know that reported crime has gone down, and I know that response to crime has gone down because changes in terms of what's responded to has changed. That said, I honestly don't know that crime rates have gone down. I know violent crime rates apparently have gone down. But unfortunately, because of the rise of fentanyl, I would be surprised if theft and other minor crimes have actually gone down. They're just not being policed because of resources. And that's something that I take personally as a challenge we have to fix.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, what can we do to keep DOC, hold them accountable for some of the things they do, and what can we do to keep incarcerated folks safe, and also for people who come out of prison. I started going to jail when I was only 12. I did 20 years incarcerated. I spent 5 years in solitary confinement. The amount of things you see in there screws you up coming out, and just starting off with nothing, you know. I don't got any family. I don't have nothing. I'm currently homeless. Went to college. I'm starting. But yeah, I just wanted to see what we can do to keep it safe and hold them accountable for all the things they do in there. And I've been stabbed. I've got broken fingers. 5 years in solitary. A lot of damage, you know.
Yep.
But yeah. That's
So,
all.
well, sir. So first of all, thanks for coming, and I understand we're going to try to talk offline sometime.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Background: I spent 3 years teaching in the prisons, mostly OSP, and currently I'm the co-chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee, which means I'm responsible for DOC's budgeting, which really in many ways means their policy. There's 3 or 4 things going on that I can't control. We are way understaffed, which means people that wouldn't otherwise be hired are kept on. People that maybe shouldn't work as many hours at a time do, so perhaps either they're not where they should be when something happens among folks incarcerated, or perhaps their frustrations become manifest. It's a bad situation all the way around. We also have, in my mind, a horrible, Americans are very good at the initial game, and then we kind of forget and move on to other things, and the end game we're not very good at. Placement and reintroduction to society is, I think, the most important part of the process, and is generally the last funded because it's not as sexy as all the other stuff that gets on the news and gets clicks and everything else. That said, in the past, I've worked with the Lifers Club at OSP on different ideas and suggestions. I'm a big believer in college inside to get prepared to go outside. I believe that the release program should be much more robust than it has been, meaning that 9 to 10 months before you're released, you start working on the building blocks of other things. And again, we've had cycles where that was good, but cycles where it wasn't. So bottom line is, it is a huge issue right now as we transition, and we get, quite frankly, I've let out a lot of folks who are for lesser crimes, folks who in some ways are more violent, at least a number, and trying to figure out how we can help people who really, like yourself, want to get back into society and those who we really need to keep away from other folks, including other inmates. So look forward to that conversation. And again, I don't promise miracles, but we are trying to make some progress with the new director.
I got a lot more questions. So
All right.
be prepared.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add something here. There's so much to talk about here. It's ridiculous. And this is, again, I will say, this is the issue that has come to me as somebody running that has broken my heart. And the conversations I have had with people on this issue or several other will stay with me for my entire life. When we look at, I'm going to go somewhere else and I'll loop it back. When we started tackling the issue of homelessness here in Salem, we split it up into 3 buckets. And we talked about prevention, managing, and ending. And a lot of folks said, shove all of the money into ending, which is building more housing, right? Don't worry about the other 2, just focus here. And our council really came around this idea that we can't do that. We have to do all 3 things at one time. And when I look at a system that is failing the way that our justice system is failing here, I look at ways that we can do prevention. I'm talking about funding our education system, making sure that housing and food is secure for folks, making sure that we have access to good jobs and training. Look at managing, and I think that really has a lot to do with reforms. I am not okay with what's happening in our prisons right now. I want that to be on the record. I cannot wait until I'm elected so that I can dive into these issues and work with really great people like Paul to really get at the root cause. And then when you look at ending, we're talking about, what is the word, recidivization? Did I say that right?
Sure.
Okay.
Recidivism, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. How are we helping people leave that system and reintegrate into our communities? And so we can't just focus on one of these areas. We have to do all 3 at the same time. And a lot is going to be asked of our communities, where we're talking about our unhoused crisis, whether we're talking about our justice crisis, whether we're talking about our mental and behavioral health care crisis. All of it is going to take a lot from all of us, but I'm really committed to helping in this area. Thanks for coming down and asking your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, I don't know, it's up to you. I know that Paul does have to leave. I don't know if you want to take one last question.
Let's do one more, then I do.
One last question, and then yes.
Thank you, sorry about that.
No worries, thank you.
For underrepresented groups, what are you gonna do? Cause there's federal recognition for Native Americans and stuff. What about people are Mayan or Aztecs? What are you gonna do for them? Cause I'm part Mayan, my dad's part Mayan, but there's no benefits we get unlike the Native Americans. And there should be some recognition that we get too.
I think the question is, we have recognition for Native American tribes as indigenous persons in the state of Oregon, or in the nation, but we don't have for Mayan organizations, foundations largely that maybe were not as populous or not as many groups in the United States, at least at the time. For folks who identify as Aztec and Mayan and Inca and other groups that are indigenous, to me, it makes sense to have, like the Canadian system does, a recognition of indigenous peoples. And then basically the first step is indigenous peoples, and then the identification process. The United States is a very strange process for understanding Native Americans, as I believe it's still based on percentage of blood or something like that. Has it changed finally?
That's all colonization right there. So that's why we do not look at that. Like I said before,
Right.
the borders crossed us. So like him, his question is, that's what we're talking about. Indigenous people say, that's what he's asking about.
Well,
this is from a community member asking what we do
so.
as Native and Indigenous.
So from a state perspective, we don't get to decide federal policy. So I will certainly like to meet with you and figure out what it is you'd like to see happen. But in Oregon, unless a group was here before colonization, we haven't really done a lot of work to develop those relationships. Certainly open to that. Certainly to me, if you're a member of an indigenous person or an indigenous group, you should have some kind of recognition and some kind of identification. But I'll tell you what I know and what I don't know. I don't know federal law on this. I'm pretty good on state law, but certainly willing to work with you to try to figure out what we can do.
Okay, that's going to conclude the open questions. I know that Paul does have to go, but I believe Virginia will still be here for a little small meet and greet if folks want to come up and have a conversation with Virginia. And you can also catch Paul Evans at a different time. But I just want to say I appreciate CCTV and Radio Poder for live broadcasting and streaming the candidate forum. And I want to thank everyone who showed up today, especially the candidates that showed up today as well. Thank you all.